The last wave of reprints came with RB01 Resurgence Booster on September 29th, 2023, a little over 1 year ago. But in that time span, Bandai has heavily ramped up the number of sets that English audiences have seen, and these reprints only cover cards for the English audiences up to BT5. And while some cards have gotten a quote-unquote reprint in some other form, I can't help but wonder if there should be another set that reprints older cards. On one hand, you have players who are resellers who primarily want to just make as much money on cards as possible that they can get their hands on, while other players, old and new, are just wanting to play a deck. Buyouts frequently happen as a result of events, and with Nationals looming on the horizon, it's no surprise that certain cards are already getting more costly. Today's video looks at a select number of cards since BT5, some even older, since the RB1 had secret rares like Lucemon and Omnimon's Warp Defeat, which were the big hits of that time. But for the most part, these cards have been power crept, and if you're really wanting to play certain decks, at times, certain cards are just needed. And while true some of these cards are currently getting a reprint in the special limited set, not all cards from Japan side of things are getting that reprint. In addition to discussing the cards that I'd like to see get a reprint, I want to also frame this video in several ways about how Bandai could deliver these reprints. By the end, do let me know what option you strongly prefer, and most of all, what cards you agree with. To start the discussion from a player perspective, how much should a common be? An uncommon? A rare? Frankly, when it comes to your average price for all the rarities in the Digimon card game, it feels like a common should be under 50 cents, uncommon under $1, rares a couple bucks, and then once you hit super rare territory, they could be literally anything. You could have extremely cheap super rares that are worth $0.25. But on the other hand, you could have a super rare that's maybe $20 or even $30, with some going exceptionally high in the case of Protoform. This is where the discussion diverges also into a single question I want you to consider. Why does a card get reprinted? Is it the cost of the card? Or is it the availability of the card? Sometimes the answer is both, and sometimes it's arguably one. Because of this, I want to set the foundation in that the majority of cards selected in today's video are all cards that I feel should be under a specific value threshold. Starting with common cards, there's only one card that truly came to mind in regards to a reprint, and that's Gazimon. While true, this card received a reprint in BT11. The regular version of the card is currently over $1, and the alt art is getting real close to $10. This card is powerful enough in its own in that purple has a lot of recursion power, making memory efficient decks struggle when trying to gain back memory. This card's value may also be attributed to the fact that it is heavily used in purple decks. But with the release of Special Booster 2.0 and the release of Zenimon, I do want to justify that Bandai may be adding more Floodgate members with the same effect. What's to say, come BT50, we get a Memory Floodgate Agumon. Jokes aside, there weren't a lot of other common cards that I felt truly needed another printing, which is why I'm going to dive next into an uncommon. Like the commons, there was only one uncommon card that struck out as needing a reprint, and that's X-Antibody from BT9. Again, we did already get a reprint for this card in the Advanced Beelzemon starter deck, but really? $5 to $6 for an uncommon and $7 for the alternate art? This card is powerful enough on its own to honestly be tucked under anything at any given time, and can't be trashed from the Digivolution sources. As for rares, there were quite a few options to select from, but ultimately these three were the ones that struck out to me in my research on TCG Player. This one may shock some players, but BT16 and EX6 had some of the lowest numbers in regards to being in the wild. And even looking at their box prices, it does feel like a lot of cards from these two sets specifically have extremely high value. Which is why for the first rare, I wanted to nominate BT16 Ukomon as another reprint. This rare is still over $10, and is commonly used to fill out decks if you're needing to fill out 4 slots for consistency and creating extra raises. $5 a copy I can see, but over $10? Yikes. Hope this little guy doesn't get limited in the next restriction list. Number 2 on my list for rares is going to Analog Youth. Like Ukomon, this card has an identical price point at over $10. And while not as generic and as used in a lot of decks, the searchability it offers in filling one's trash with cards helps set up decks that want a hefty trash. Surprisingly, this card has not seen a reprint since EX1, which was a set released over 2 years ago. And lastly, while not as new as Ukomon, Rivals Barrage from the Beelzemon Advanced Starter deck are still crazy value. This is the most expensive card in the deck and is at the present a card used in Purple Hybrid. I've covered commons, I've covered uncommons, and now I've covered rares. Super rares is going to be probably the most controversial discussion for some players, because they may feel another card deserves priority. The most obvious one, of course, goes to X-Antibody Protoform. This card came out in EX5, and though it is a weaker version of X-Antibody from BT9, in many ways players are preferring this card to its previous counterpart. And considering it's in a few of the top meta decks right now, it does make it difficult to justify that $40 to $50 per a copy price tag. Needless to say, this is one of the cards I'm hoping gets another reprint soon. But on the flip side, I could see a justification for not reprinting this card, because while X-Antibody and X-Antibody Protoform have debuted in the Digimon card game, BT20 might sneak us something in the form of X-Antibody Strong. I mentioned EX6 cards earlier, and there are two cards, at least one of them, needs a reprint. Lucemon Chaos Mode is frankly pretty darn expensive for a super rare. Much like Protoform, it's in the $40 range. But another reason why I would love a reprint of this card is mainly because it's already hinted that there is a tamer for Lucemon in Liberator. And if you happen to need this Lucemon to make the deck work, you're already locking it behind a paywall. The secondary card from EX6 is also going to be Cherubimon Ace. Again, a lot of decks, whether they're yellow or green, can utilize this card. Moving back to older sets, Mervamon is probably the next choice I have for reprints, because again, purple cards are just powerful at times that suddenly you're having to invest over $100 at times to even build the deck. Mervamon also recently got a reprint in the Premium Heroine set, but again, this is locked behind its own separate paywall, and if you didn't order it, you can't anymore. The last card for the super rares goes to Kazuamon. This card recently spiked due to the Japan meta of Taomon Loop. And though it is seeing play over in the East, we won't be seeing this loop until February of next year. But if the loop does happen to survive a restriction, we may see this card also jump to over $20. But now onto the secret rares. There are so many cards here that I honestly want to see get a reprint. But for this discussion, I've limited it to 5 cards that I feel deserve it. Beelstarmon is the first card that I like to see get another printing. And while true she's really cheap, remember if Bandai were to select any number of cards for a reprint set, they can't all be big home runs. And considering you might get an even better art for her, worth it. The second card of course has to go to Ancient Greymon from BT4. This card has seen a resurgence with the support from Special Booster 2.0. And honestly seeing this card go from sub $20 to over $40 again is crazy to me. The downside is if you wanted this card, it had a very low pull rate amongst my BT4 cases, indicating that it was much harder to pull. Third on my list has to go to Galacticmon, because frankly for a deck that doesn't even see much play in events, it baffles me a little that this card is over $30. Though with new support from 2.0, and Zenith being the character who pilots this deck, I definitely expect more cards to support the archetype and inevitably drive the price up. The last two secrets that I like to see get a reprint are both Royal Knight related. Jesmon GX holds a similar position to me from the perspective of Beelstarmon. It's not too crazy expensive, but with newer Royal Knights being printed, at some point it will make Jesmon GX busted. Just give it time. But with the other Royal Knight, it goes to Ulforce's personal tamer, Rina Shinamaya. For another deck that hasn't seen too many placements in the last couple of formats, it's crazy she's still above the $30 mark. And that's what the waifu tax is all about. But with a reprint, this would make it more readily for players to even try Ulforce. But for the last segment of cards to discuss over, it's all promos. My personal opinion is promos are very powerful cards that can definitely help a deck out. Just look at the original promo Ukomon for example. Raremon is one of the cards that you just need, whether you're playing purple or Machinedramon based decks. But even with the regional participant pricing, this card is still $20 for a promo, which means you have to invest at minimum $80 into a deck that might not even be top tier. This is one issue I have with the majority of promos in the Digimon card game because of their availability and how this can lead to higher prices than anticipated. Likewise, do you see promo Seadramon in any decks for events? For almost $30 a copy, you need to invest $120 for a playset if you want to potentially try a deck out that uses it? No thank you. Promo Kuwagamon is currently chilling at about $20, and frankly this one isn't as terrible as the others. Likewise, Shadramon is in the same boat, but again, if you're wanting to play Virus Imperial Dramon, you have to invest $80 into a deck that goes Unga Bunga, but might not even be able to win? Seadramon and Raremon were the most expensive promos in this discussion section, but the other three were under the $20 price point. The third being Shushumon. When Bandai first unveiled the Fabled Waltz structure deck, I knew immediately that this deck would be more expensive than the Zephyrgamon deck, because of the fact that the yellow promos weren't as readily available. Between these two decks, Shushumon was the only card that had the least amount of supply comparatively to Shumon, Terramon, and Galemon, which is why I'd want a reprint of this card. This video has discussed 20 different cards that I'd personally like to see a reprint. 1 common, 1 uncommon, 3 rares, 5 super rares, 5 secret rares, and 5 promos. And whether you agree or disagree with the examples I used in today's video is completely fine. But I ask this question again, in that if the deck isn't competitive in the case of some of these promos, can you truly justify trying the deck out if the promo is going to set you back over $100? Last but not least, the delivery system to players is another contentious point that I'd like to discuss before closing out the video. Bandai has made an attempt to provide a reprint set with Resurgence Booster with mixed reviews, most of which that it was too late. But Bandai also has a special limited set that's coming up that provides similar elements of cards needing a reprint, just not all of them. But the most effective way of delivering reprints from what I have seen is not buying boxes and gambling for specific cards, but entering in events where regionals have kindly provided some of those hard to get cards. In-person regionals not only guarantee participation items, but also encourages a community that can trade with each other if you're not necessarily wanting to spend the money. Overall, what are your thoughts on the reprints for the Digimon card game? What cards do you want to see get a reprint? And finally, what is your preferred delivery system to get these reprints? Let me know your thoughts on this video, and I'll catch you hopefully this week with more Digimon content. If I don't upload anything else after today, happy Thanksgiving, and I'm thankful to all of you for supporting the channel. This is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.